The Joe Rogan Experience.
So let's talk about China. Yeah, so I just mentioned that story that just came out, which is that they actually prevented PPE from being delivered outside of China. So that our companies, 3M, they produce it there, should have been exported out. They prevented that. There was a study that showed that if they had actually been honest and given the world 3 weeks extra notice, 95% of the spread could have been contained. Okay,
wow.
5 million people left Wuhan. They allowed travel out of Wuhan. 5 million people were traveling all over China, all over the world. The reason this became so bad in Italy and Iran is because of the Belt and Road Initiative. These are major hotspots for China's economic development and the Belt and Road Initiative. So then let's get into the World Health Organization. There's got to be a come to Jesus moment on the World Health Organization. Again, mid-January, World Health Organization says that, or they repeat the claims made by China that it can't even be transmitted human-to-human contact. On January 30th, World Health Organization said something along the lines of, there's no reason to be shutting down travel or limiting travel. So they are directly controlled by the Chinese government, the World Health Organization. It should also be worth noting, I forget the guy's name who runs it, the director of the WHO, but he's, I believe he's from Ethiopia. And Ethiopia is one of these countries that is a huge, has a huge investments from the Belt and Road Initiative. And so, I mean, we need to be calling for a complete change out in leadership at the WHO. I mean,
we've seen that video where they refused to acknowledge. He refuses to acknowledge the existence of Taiwan. He wouldn't even say it. The woman keeps questioning him, and he shuts his camera off.
Yeah, it was like when you asked me about marijuana use, and I pretended I couldn't hear you. Like
but you were joking, though. We were right in front of each other joking. Yeah. That's different. I mean, that guy, he shut his connection off, and then he said, China's doing a great job. Let's move on. And, like what? Yeah. Very weird.
I mean, it's so deeply corrupt. It's so deeply corrupt. And, I mean, I don't think the WHO will ever have the standing that it did before, not without an immediate and serious leadership change, because they've lost all credibility. And then move on, fast forward, the Chinese were perpetuating it. It's unclear whether they started this talking point or whether it was the progressive left and the Chinese just repeated it and latched onto it. But this whole notion that it's racist to call the virus the Chinese virus was such an utterly absurd thing that we were focused on as a country when it just doesn't matter. It just, no matter what your opinion on whether it's actually racist or not. I mean, I personally don't think it is. There's a history of calling a virus some kind of geographic name based on where it's from. That's fine. The point is that Chinese authorities were spreading that quite a bit in February. So they're doing things like that. Then they claim that perhaps it was the U.S. Army that had started the virus in Wuhan. They haven't let international inspectors go in and investigate the origins of this virus so that we can better understand it. There's going to be, there already is quite a few things that we're looking at as what we can do to, one, rebalance our supply chains. That as a country, we need a better industrial policy on bringing a lot of important manufacturing back home and being more competitive in that sense.
Can I ask you this? Is there any evidence that this was a man-made virus? This is the big conspiracy theory that there was some sort of a level 4 bioweapons lab in Wuhan. Yeah,
and I just don't know. I mean, I could pontificate.
But it is true that there was a bioweapons lab in Wuhan? Yeah.
I don't know if it's meant for weapons, but there's certainly a lab there that would have housed viruses like this. And we just don't know the answers. And I don't, especially in my position, I don't want to pontificate. Of
course.
I don't want to assume.
Do you think that this, because of the consequences of this virus and all this, that this awakens people to the need to manufacture things in America, particularly medical supplies, so many things that we rely on China for?
100%. And this is something Trump has been talking about forever. And I think he's received skepticism from both the left and the right on that for different reasons. Mostly from the right because, we have, and the Republicans need to come to terms with this, is we have really adhered very closely to a more libertarian mindset of free trade where the more free trade, the better. where if somebody else can make it cheaper, then we should just have them make it all, right? This comparative advantage theory. And that's true in theory. It is true, but we can't ignore the consequences. And I think we have ignored those consequences for a little too long. Like what happens when you close down that factory? Yeah, like your T-shirts are 3 cents cheaper per unit, which is a really big deal for the margins of your company. And yeah, that company can hire more people and you get a cheaper T-shirt, but we kind of miss those manufacturing jobs. Like there's like a moral, or not a moral, but like a psychological benefit to these manufacturing jobs as well. You're creating something. People like that. People like to feel like they're producing something and that they have meaningful work that pays pretty decent. And so there's consequences, and there's consequences to the efficiency that has occurred. And then there's national security consequences, and we're learning about those right now. And it's not just medical supplies that we need to take a look at. I'm from Houston, so our oil and gas industry is in a big dire straits right now. We risk the possibility that we lose energy between Russia and Saudi Arabia. Now, hopefully, I think the administration has been able to use some diplomatic pressure and figured that out to an extent. But we have to decide whether we think there's value in doing things ourselves. That's the ultimate question. And I would answer that yes, there is. Now, do we take it to an extreme? No. But are we out of balance right now? Maybe. Yes. And maybe we do need to look at changing our supply chains. Maybe that means some things are just slightly more expensive. Maybe that's what it means. But for a lot of items, we have to be looking at that. We have to be thinking that way.
Well, I think also when you look at what are the consequences of allowing us to have things manufactured over there, what kind of karma do we take on for when you look at Foxconn, those buildings where they manufacture iPhones, and they have nets around them to keep people from jumping off. Like, how many people have to jump before you put nets up? And like, what has to happen there where your life sucks so hard to make an iPhone? I mean, how much would it cost to make those here? Is it worth it for us? And, is there the real value in that, the label that we used to love to look for, made in America? That's not really discussed that much anymore, but I think it would be wise for all of us to invest in that idea again.
Yeah, and the problem is like we hold ourselves to those standards of good labor conditions and good environmental standards, but we punish ourselves almost out of business completely. And so we punish ourselves out of business, usually through these specific regulations, whether labor or environmental. But then we also engage in free trade, so it almost guarantees that we lose out our own manufacturing base, or sometimes the energy sector, whatever it is, because we simultaneously make ourselves less competitive while also forcing our people to compete against people who work their employees so hard that they have to build nets around their office as they throw themselves off of it. That's such a good question, by the way. Like, how many people actually jump before they put the nets? What is the number?
That is just a crazy reality. And it's also one that we just accept because we want an iPhone. And I mean, Apple's one of the most profitable companies the world's ever known. I mean, it's a spectacularly profitable company. And there's a whole of government policy and a whole of society. I don't even say government. It's really society that we all have to kind of collectively look at this. And it's going to take the private sector as well. Because Apple would tell you, okay, I'd love to open up a plant here. And they do, but they'd like to do more. The reason they don't is because when they put out that job application, nobody will show up, or at least not enough people. And so what does that tell you? It tells you that we're not educating people in the skills that are necessary to engage in these jobs. There's a lot of technical skills that we are not teaching because, so this gets to education policy. Why aren't we promoting more STEM? Why aren't we promoting via the federal loan program, student loans? Why aren't we promoting things and majors that actually get us to a higher paying job? Why should the taxpayer be on the hook for a major that is guaranteed not to pay anything once you graduate? Like, what are you going to do with that degree and whatever
who knows? You can name, but you know what I'm talking about. You can name a bunch, right? Gender studies, whatever. These are not high-paying things, and they're not useful for the economy that we want. And so, what kind of incentives need to shift is my point, to encourage more of that, so that Apple, when they do look at a place to build a new factory, they can be confident that people will actually show up to work there.